Hello, my name is Ariel Balevi. On this channel, you may have noticed that I tell a number of stories from two great poets of classical Persian literature, Rumi and Attar. Now, Rumi you may have heard of beforehand through the many popular adaptations into English of his verse, rendered by such poets as Coleman Barks and Robert Bly. Attar you may also have heard of through his great mystical allegory, The Conference of the Birds, which in the West was adapted for the stage, and of which there is even an opera. Rumi and Attar are considered central figures in a tradition known as Sufism. It is really through my encounter with these stories and my engagement in trying to find ways of interpreting them that I have had my own encounter with this tradition known as Sufism. But this video is not so much about this century-old, venerable, rich tradition we know as Sufism. This video is rather about my own thoughts, about the stories that come from this tradition, in particular the stories of Rumi and Attar. In 1975, Martin Lings, a scholar and a biographer, wrote a book titled, What is Sufism? And I think since then, at least in the West, we have not completely answered that question. Perhaps a good working definition of Sufism would be an esoteric mystical tradition that developed within Islamic civilization, but a tradition whose core beliefs and core concepts in many ways transcends not only Islam, but the idea of religion itself. Now, in this tradition, there is a very central relationship, which is between the teacher and the disciple, between the murshid and the murid. And the way that the disciple and spiritual teacher engage with one another is through sohbet, conversation. Now, conversation can take many forms. It could be silence between the teacher and the disciple. It could be the teacher merely uttering one word for the contemplation of the disciple. But more often, sohbet, conversation, takes the form of storytelling. The teacher imparts wisdom, imparts learning to the disciple through telling a story. And so in this tradition, storytelling has a pedagogical purpose. But by that, it's not meant that stories from this tradition are one-dimensional morality tales like a fable from Aesop. No, for in this tradition, the stories are crafted in such a way that they are meant to mean something different to each individual who hears it. And it doesn't end there. These stories are crafted in such a way that they're meant to mean something different to that same person at each stage of her life. For who we were a year ago is different from who we are today. And who we will be a year from now will again be different from who we are now. And so whatever stage of life we find ourselves, whatever life situation, whatever challenge, that story is always there to invite us to our own self-discovery. When I think back on the reading up I've done on the history, not so much of Sufism, but of the translators of Rumi and Attar, one thing that I found particularly interesting is that early Western translators of Rumi, particularly his collection of stories found in the work The Masnavi, one thing that baffled these early Western translators is that Rumi's stories didn't seem to follow the Western expectations of narrative with a beginning, a middle, and an end. For you see, the stories, as Rumi tells them in his great work, the stories often have no endings. Or they lead into another story, and that story may or may not have an ending itself, depending on the context. Now, this may be very baffling if one doesn't understand the purpose of the story. For in the Sufi tradition, the story is meant to be open and embracing to anybody, from any background, from any stage of life. And so the story opens up the possibility for any listener to find her own truth. So in this spirit, I invite you once again to return to the videos on this channel of the stories of Rumi and Attar. And I invite you, hopefully in these stories, to find that moment where you and the story engage individually and possibly have your own moment of self-discovery. But for now, wishing you a very enjoyable rest of the summer and of course the approaching autumn. And I hope in the months to come, I will have many more stories to offer. Wishing you all the best. Take care.